loneliness, silence, anxiety. Too many men are carrying it alone. I'm Jack Starr, powerlifter, personal trainer, aerialist, and ex-private investigator, and this is The Other Side of Tough. We're rewriting manhood one conversation at a time, and today we have my best friend, Saralyn, and this is a momentous occasion because I have completed the trifecta of having all three of my best friends on the podcast. So, he gave me. But you are the founder of Dogs of Service, which involves blending uh, training service dogs for veterans in need of service dogs and reuniting the two. And you also train dogs. You do such an amazing job. You've trained my dog, Waylon, for 6 years, fostered him for 6 years, and now we have taken him, me and Carol. So we're really grateful for all the training you've done with him. He's a little blessing to us. He just turned 15.
Yes. And you guys continued that training, I will say. Took it to another level.
Yeah, we spoil him a little too much, but other than that, he's a good boy.
Yes.
But yeah, you've trained many dogs, and you also work with nonprofits. You provide services for low-income communities, what they call kind of nutrition deserts. Is that right? Is that what they call them?
Food deserts and food apartheids, just providing healthy food to those communities that don't have access otherwise.
Mm-hmm. And that's, I really appreciate your work there. And, just to, go on about how much you love animals and you're passionate about animals is that you've chosen to be vegan and you do not eat any animal products or wear any animal products. That's how dedicated you are to the cause of animal protection and activism. So it's great to have you on. Thank you so much for taking the time to being on my podcast. We've talked about it since the inception of my podcast, you coming on, because you and I, we have so many great conversations as best friends. And I really appreciate your point of view because you always come in with a lot of insight. But let's talk about Dogs of Service and what that is, because I've helped volunteer for that. And I think it's a great cause. It's helping many different communities. It helps you have the people in prison, right? Help train the dogs.
I did that too. So so I just realized that I founded Dogs of Service 10 years ago.
Wow.
And so it was founded as a 501c3. And then we would rescue shelter dogs and train them to be assistance animals for veterans. And then also with that, I would do a lot of assistance animal education because people don't know the differences and the legal differences too between emotional support animal, service dog, and therapy dog. So there's a lot of education that went around that too, and just helping guide people in good choices in terms of adopting animals and how they can enrich their lives. I founded Dogs of Service, and unfortunately, switching it over to not be a nonprofit anymore just because of losing funding and things like that. But I still try to be active in that community as much as I can. And I'm still, as you said, training dogs on a regular basis and still educating a lot about assistance animals. With some of the other work I've done and people I've come across, I do a lot of work educating about access rights. So housing is a big issue with animals, things like that. And then also how animals can really enrich people's lives, mostly dogs and cats. We did have a bird there. So you remember Jack, our little ESA African gray? Yeah. It's just kind of a big part of what I do. And even though it's been a little bit on the back burner in terms of switching out from nonprofit to a business, and that was because of COVID. We were doing so well working on contracts with the mayor's office and the VA, and COVID just upended everything, unfortunately.
Yeah.
So it's been tough. It's been a kind of a long, winding road with that, but looking forward to kind of the next chapter, which is this year, which is going to be still continuing with the dog training, but just trying to get more of those information and resources out, and then seeing how I can work not just with veterans, but also outside of the veteran group and other groups of people about how dogs can help, how people can utilize dogs to help their mental health. That is such a big one that I think is so important. That, you know, we don't realize how much animals can help us in our lives, and especially around issues of mental health. So still very passionate about that.
Yeah, and I'm glad you brought that up, because that brings me to my question. In your work with Dogs of Service, you work with many veterans, and as you know, our generation has faced some of the most wars out of any generation, and we have the most veterans in our generation than most generations in the past, just because, like I said, we've in our generation X, we've pretty much been at war, since the 90s, in some way. And so, men and women have been out in the battlefield and they've faced many traumas. And, I feel like organizations like the VA by the government, they have things set up for the physical challenges after combat, after experiencing that, but they don't have, I feel like they don't do enough for the invisible scars that veterans have, which is the mental health crisis. And it's reflected in what I talk about in the crisis of masculinity, that we find today, that many men are facing a male loneliness epidemic and mental health crisis. And a lot of those men are veterans. How do you think the VA could improve? Do you think the VA should improve in its services with mental health? And, how is Dogs of Service helping to address that?
Yeah, I think it's a really tough and complicated problem, and also question, because there's still a lot of ideas out there of how to help. Part of the problem is that endemic in the culture and the military culture is a lot of masculinity, and it's a lot of toxic masculinity. It's not necessarily positive. There's still a lot of kind of not being open about emotions and feelings, and what you said about wars too. I think what's also different is,
I think they teach you how to, I'm sorry to interject.
no,
I
go
think
for
they
it.
teach you, from my experience with veterans and people that have faced this, because I know a lot of veterans that do have mental health issues, is that, they come at an early age, like in their 20s, and they make, they're trained to kill people, to handle combat situations, but they're never trained on how to retriculate. I don't know the word.
Rematriculate or reintegrate into society.
Reintegrate into society. Yes.
Yeah, and that's very true. When people are coming in at a young age, and a lot of times too, there's still this idea that people are coming into the military from these vulnerable communities where they don't have any other options. They see it as a way out, which in a sense, it's good they have options. There's a lot of education and skills, but at the same time, there is, the emotional intelligence that you learn in the military, and some of the basic life skills of, like, this is how we, keep our house going by doing laundry and dishes, and this is how we hold down a regular job. A lot of that is kind of missing, because it's so regimented and structured that when you step away from that, and it's similar in a sense to people who, when they get out of prison, it's really hard to adapt back to regular life. Obviously different, but there are overlaps and similarities in that. And so it's challenging. And then when you also have on top of it kind of this emotional burden from everything that people may or may not have seen, because, a smaller percentage of veterans see combat, and that is obviously traumatic. Veterans who are also working in other areas or who don't see combat, they also have issues dealing with, like, oh, well, these people had this level of service and they're combat, and so then they also struggle with, like, maybe I didn't do enough, or I'm not that kind of veteran. Like, there's just a lot of these kind of ideas that infiltrate and percolate throughout the military, where it's like some veterans are better than others, or more are deserving of certain things than others. And there's a lot of kind of judgment between different groups of people in the military. And then this is also all separate from women in the military, I don't have the stat, but I mean, it is extremely high, the rate of women who face military sexual trauma. So,
Sexual assault.
and it's from other men that they're serving with, and higher ups and superiors, and just kind of the gamut. So, that's another issue, but that's also whole side issue. But, it's still something that other men witness, experience, take part in, that also doesn't allow them, it affects their mental health in short. And it's in so many different ways, but the problem is, like you said, there's not enough mental health support when they get out. And they're trying to, but at the same time, mental health care is so individual, one-on-one. There's definitely processes and things that work for everyone, but you really need those connections and touch points with people to have an impact and make a difference. And that's really, really hard to get, especially on a regular basis. And, just finding peer support. And because, like I said, there is that toxic masculinity where sometimes other veterans, can be judgmental of other veterans. That can be hard to find sometimes, or just they just struggle to reach out in general. It's really hard for people to find their support group.
The nail in the hand, or the hammer, or the nail with the hammer, right there.
Hit the nail on the head.
Yeah, nail on the head. There you go. But I think you got it right there, because I think that culture of masculinity, of toxic masculinity, when you reach out for help, especially with things like mental health, it's looked down upon, and it's looked like you're weak. It's like, what, you couldn't handle it? You couldn't, and that's like the mentality that you're trained with in combat, right? Is like, no matter what's going on, like, they purposely put you in the most like traumatic, jarring situations where you have to keep your shit together and have to keep focused in a battlefield, right? And you can't express emotions, or feel things out, or process things like you and I do through therapy, through being well-balanced people. But in the military, they train that out of you, and then when you come back into the world, and the last person you're going to seek help from is one of your brothers in arms, because you're going to be looking weak to them, and they're probably thinking the same thing. They're probably needing help too, but they're not going to go to you because they don't want to look weak to you, because of that training and that mentality, that kind of toxic masculinity that you're talking about.
Yeah, and and also just to put in there, like, some of that training is warranted. Like, you do need to having the ability to remain calm and think and not be reactive is extremely valuable. And there are elements of that can be helpful in the civilian world. And, when we talk about emotional intelligence and emotional IQ and reactivity, that's a positive thing. If you're in a stressful situation, you can take a breath, you can assess, you can look around, you can see what's going on. Those are extremely valuable skills. However, when people start doing that all of the time with everything, which is part of this hyper awareness with PTSD, then you are completely checked out of your emotions. You're not taking a break. You're not taking those pauses to be like, okay, this is how I really feel. And instead, you just are turning around and reacting, and that's kind of where things lead into trouble, because you're so shut down from your emotions. And it's like, you've learned to stay calm and stoic and face these situations under high pressure and high stress. But there's a time when you're not having that. And then what do you do with those feelings? So that is one of the really big problems. And, when you come back and people with PTSD, it's like you're sitting in traffic and someone's honking at you. It's like a lot of us, and Jack, I know you can also kind of relate to this from some of your anger issue, and we all get the road rage. But, if you have that feeling of like, oh my God, this person's honking, I'm going to go bash it, whatever it is, how we process that and how we actually deal with that is very different. So like I might be like, okay, fine, take a breath. But if you're someone with PTSD, you have these experiences, but these flare-ups are happening multiple times a day and you don't have a good outlet. That's really, really tough. I mean, you really need help and support to deal with that. Those are big emotions to process when you're having anger at that level on a regular basis.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And how do, so, you know, you train dogs. Do you
Mhm.
train for emotional support, like stress or PTSD? Explain
Yeah,
that.
so emotional support animals technically don't need any formal training.
Okay.
They're just there to kind of help support you with a disability,
Okay.
and that is something that your mental health care provider can prescribe. Basically, they would write a letter saying that you need an emotional support animal, and then you have a disability, and this is why. And so that's a key thing, that it is a disability. It is something that impacts you and impacts your daily life. So, everyone's like, I have anxiety. And it's like, humans have anxiety. It's part of our natural process system. Does that anxiety not allow you to go out? Does that anxiety stop you from doing things with your friend, going out in a public space, or having to just kind of shut yourself in a quiet space for a couple of hours because you feel so overwhelmed? So that's where we look at this tipping point of anxiety between something normal to something disabling. If you can't enjoy activities and do things that you would normally do, then that turns it into a disability. And so
Okay.
emotional support animals, they have access rights in your living space. They used to on airplanes. They don't anymore, simply because people took advantage of it, and there's so many animals on planes, and we've all heard the stories of peacocks and all that kind of stuff. But but emotional support animals are really protected within your own living space, and you do need a doctor's note stating why you need that emotional support animal. So you can get it from a therapist. Sometimes you can get it from your regular doctor if they're treating you with anxiety medications or something like that, or depression. And then a service animal is a dog or a miniature horse. So let's clarify that. Service animals are only miniature horses and only dogs. That's
And
it. Yeah.
really?
Yeah. So I've only met one miniature horse service animal. I would love to meet more.
I know, right?
but,
Amazing.
but they're really cute and adorable. It is still a
I
horse
know.
though.
Uh-huh.
um, but yeah, and so a service animal directly tasked for your disability, whatever it is. So that's where you can think of, a diabetes a diabetes dog. So a dog will alert you when your blood sugar is low to
Wow.
test and take insulin, that kind of thing. You can have psychiatric service animals. So what they're going to do is, if you start to have a panic attack, if you start to black out, they will lead you somewhere safe. They're not just going to comfort you. They're going to actively do something to keep you safe and react to what you're going through.
Can they sense
Um,
your blood pressure going up? I've heard things like that.
yep.
Wow, that's amazing.
Yeah, so they can sense, so like diabetic alert dogs, they'll sense on your breath when your blood sugar changes,
Oh.
that's how they do it. Seizure dogs, that is a natural skill that you just shaped. They haven't figured out how to train a dog to specifically alert to seizures, because we're not entirely sure what the dog is picking up on that knows that this person's going to have a seizure. So it's super fascinating what they can and kind of can't do, but there's a lot of what they can do more so than can't.
Hmm.
And so, yeah, dogs, especially for psychiatric issues, heart rate, they'll notice if you're kind of getting anxious. Like if you wiggle your foot and you just are like jittery, can't stop moving, they'll work with that. I've trained dogs too for a lot of like picking at your fingers, which I'm guilty of. You're stressed and you're just sitting there like picking or biting your nails,
Yeah.
until the point that they bleed. Not just like, we're talking
Oh.
about people who are doing this compulsively and repetitively. So dogs will interrupt that.
Hmm.
Just different patterns and things that you have. And then one of the really cool things is learning to, when someone's having a panic attack,
Yeah.
getting them on the ground, either laying on them for deep pressure therapy, or I should say, finding help. So they'll seek out a person and lead that person back to their human who's having an issue. So it's super fascinating and pretty amazing what they can do. And of course, because people hear, oh my God, they can do all these things, I want one. What they don't realize is that it is about 2 years worth of training for a dog to be an active service dog, at least. The dog should be about 2 years old because that's when they're fully developed. So you're probably starting with a young puppy and then
Yeah.
continuing all this training work. And it's super expensive to do the training and have the gear. And then being able to take your dog places and all the little things that have to go along with that. So people can spend like $20,000 to $100,000 on training a service dog.
Wow.
So it's a massive expense, which is why I founded Dogs of Service, because veterans can't really afford that.
Yeah.
And there's also a lot of areas within that you can make adjustments for, where you can have a dog who's maybe an ESA, not a full access service dog, but you can still teach that dog to help with tasks when they're at home. So like if a veteran has problems sleeping and they have nightmares, you can train the dog to come up and like comfort them, lick them, nudge them awake, and get them to calm down to go back to sleep. And what's great about that is, not all dogs can do the public access work. It's extremely difficult. And public access is doing things like going to the grocery store, going to the movies, going on a plane. The dog has to be completely non-reactive and focused.
Okay.
It's really, really difficult to train that. But there are other options where you can train a dog to help you in all those ways. You just don't bring it to places like the grocery store because your dog might not be good at the grocery store. Therefore, we just don't take the dog to the grocery store and you bring a human with you if you'd like to go. So there's some nuances there, but it is a lot of work. And so, especially with training rescue dogs, a lot of the dogs that are seen for like people with hearing issues, people who need seeing eye dogs, things like that, they are program trained and they are specially bred dogs that are from lineages that work in these specific fields. Because, I mean, a seeing eye dog, that dog could really injure a person if they're not well trained. So we have to be careful with how much trust we're putting in these dogs and making sure we put the training in. But when we take a rescue dog, still there's a high fail rate. And then also it's really adjusting for what they can and can't do and based on the person's needs. So that was kind of my approach to it. I know there's a lot of organizations and people out there who help and who may have stricter guidelines. Like they want to make sure all the dogs can go out in public, which I get that it makes sense. It's not kind of what we would do. But there's just a long wait list. And the VA, one reason too why Dogs of Service started switching out of being a nonprofit is because thankfully the VA started covering service dogs for veterans and having it done by outside training organizations. And so that was the process that we were looking at going through. You have to apply and you have to become a part of other associations to do that, which makes sense if it's being covered, but it was also very cumbersome. And with the kind of work that we were doing, where we were doing more ESAs, we couldn't afford the expense and the time. It's just Dogs of Service is pretty much me. So, it's a lot. I don't know, running a nonprofit is a ton of work, especially in California, with all of the administrative paperwork you have to do and high costs and things like that. So, but thankfully, like I said, the VA has kind of stepped up a little bit in that regard. The process is still very bureaucratic, unfortunately, but it's there.
Okay. So what got you into, I mean, you are so passionate and knowledgeable about dogs. Where did this passion come from? Was it did you just, grow up loving dogs? Or was there, some event or something that, happened in your life that has made you so passionate about animals and dogs in general, especially with your vegan lifestyle?
Yeah, so no, interestingly, I did not grow up with a dog. I grew up with a big fat cat named Astro. Like literally pictures of me as a baby with Astro in my playpen. He lived
Oh,
until I was about 13 or 14. But my grandma would always rescue animals. So she always had a rescue dog. We were always rescuing cats. She lived kind of out in the country and across the street from a farm. And so there was just, some cats next door that we ended up rescuing kittens and taking home with us. Just always animals around. I had all different kinds of pets, things that we would find, things that people would give away, things that we got. So I've been around so many animals. I've been very lucky to have that experience. I've just always connected with them. That's just always what I've loved. That's always what I've wanted to learn about. And so as I got older and I started fostering more dogs, when I was in college, I adopted Marcel, who you know. And he was just the most amazing dog. I've never met another dog who is so emotionally in tune with what is going on. And so I learned from him, and also taking him to see my grandfather, who he had a stroke. He was in a specialized care facility. And just watching Marcel go around to each person and knowing how to interact with them and what they were comfortable with was pretty amazing. I was like, okay, I didn't realize, I've loved dogs. This was my first dog. I didn't realize how in tune they could be with humans. I just started exploring it more, learning more, volunteered as much as I could, took all the volunteer trainings, went to all the dog training classes with my foster dog and learned everything I can. And then that continued as I moved out here as well, volunteering for Best Friends and some other organizations. So it's always been there. It's just, that's how it's been.
That made me think of something you talking about dogs, how special their empathetic power is, especially with humans. They're the only animal that's truly, went from the wilderness to domestication by choice, by seeking out humans and integrating with them on pure power of empathy, of being able to sense emotions or feelings and bridge that gap between species.
Dogs also actually learned how to read human expression through their evolutionary process. They've learned what kind of a smile is and how to learn human body language that is then translated down.
And a smile in the original dog's world would be a sign of aggression, but they've evolved to learn that that's not, with humans.
Yep.
That's a really good point. Yeah. But that always blows my mind. There was there's been a couple videos on that, and it's just amazing that a wolf went ahead and made that journey to be oh, I can get food from this human and I don't have to
yeah, and then if I do this, the human will give me more food, and that is still how it works, surprisingly.
It involves the hunter out of them, and then the final product is you get Waylon.
Yes, exactly.
Fly, but just survives on being cute alone and being stinky.
Yep, exactly. Marks his territory with his stink.
Yeah. That's the only defense mechanism is the stinkiness. But yeah, I mean that work with dogs is fantastic. Now, did you work with? I seem to remember you working with prison populations to help train.
Yes. Yeah, and so I worked with the Positive Change program. I think it was 4 or 5 dogs that we would help rescue and then take from the program, who were trained in prison by prisoners. It was male prisoners. And so they were all paired up with a dog. And then they had that dog for a certain amount of time. I believe it was a few months. And then they would continuously train that dog. There was one trainer who was so talented at what he did. He had a dog. Oh my gosh, I'm blanking on the dog's name. Jackie met him, the Doberman mix. Anyway, super, super great, cute dog. And this one trainer worked with him, and he was so good at it. Like, he learned so much. He delved in. I had a chance to go into prison and meet with him, spoke with him. He kind of gave me, like, went over all these notes that he did on training the dog, and like, really wonderful. It was just so encouraging of him because he did such a good job. He's now out of prison, has been training dogs very successfully. Recently, I think he got out and had a kid even. I follow him still on social. And but these programs would really kind of, it would bring all different prisoners together. I don't know if a lot of people know those prisons are usually segregated in a lot of forms. So this kind of broke through that. They would all have to apply to the program, be accepted. They'd have to apply each session. So just because you get in once doesn't mean that you're guaranteed to get in again. And they would continuously apply for this program. And they would just train these dogs and do some of the most amazing work. And we placed quite a few of them. You know, one of my favorite was this little Chihuahua, Chi-Chi, who was with this prisoner. Oh, here's one animal.
Galaxy is my favorite cat in the world, by the way. Galaxy is like 13, 14.
Yeah, she's 13.
13. Yeah. Yeah. Love Galaxy. Yeah. I'm her uncle. Glad she could be on the podcast too. But going back to what you were saying, it sounds like, you know, it has like a really positive, left a positive mark on some of these, you know, prisoners, and you know, helped give them a purpose, you know, being behind bars and having all this time. And you know, are you going to continue doing those programs now that, you know, you don't have necessarily have the nonprofit thing, or is it a logistics issue now?
Yeah, unfortunately, can't continue with some of those programs. And, you know, there's been a lot of shifts in funding for programs too. You know, nonprofits, especially this past year or last year starting, so many federal programs are getting cut and people are struggling all over. And some of those programs are really expensive to run. So unfortunately, no, and some of them are finding it tough to kind of find their place and do fundraising for them. I will say though, and just kind of getting back to the overall subject of the podcast, that talk about kind of, you know, toxic masculinity in prison culture.
Yeah.
I was only in there twice. I'm definitely no expert. I was treated so nicely. Like, I've never had so many men be so nice and respectful to me, being surrounded by men, that I was like, wow, this is people, like, aren't you afraid? And I was like, no, they're all being so respectful, so curious, so interested. You know, if you ever talk with someone else on your podcast, Jack, who can talk about some of that and why that might be, I'm super fascinated about it. But they were just really wonderful. Their families were wonderful because we went to one graduation day where some of their family members were allowed to be there. But it's just, I mean, you know, there's this one really big black guy with this tiny little Chihuahua who my friend ended up adopting because she's not a good service dog candidate. I took her on to do some therapy dog work and stuff like that. Great with that. But, you know, but talk about just kind of challenging those norms, being in prison, you know, and being prosecuted on a violent crime, and then just having this tiny little dog. And there were a lot of, you know, all the dogs just kind of ranged in size and type and all of that. So that was really interesting. And they were all so loving towards the dogs, you know, and they really cared for them, and they were all really emotional when they left. And I think that's something really important that we forget about in these toxic masculinity cultures, that they're still men, they're still people, they still need that connection. And having a dog or another animal, I know it's also taboo for guys to have cats, but same thing, having those deep emotional connections where there's nothing needed or kind of requested in return, is this unconditional love, is so important. And, you know, I think a lot of times in the pet world, like I said, with cats, or, you know, a lot of men, they're like, oh, I need this big dog with its balls swinging just so I feel like a tough macho man. It's like, What? No. Like, you can get that same kind of love and affection from a cat, or you can, like, yay to adopting a big dog, but why don't you think of the dog's health and get it fixed? Because it shouldn't be tied to your own masculinity. In a lot of ways, it can actually do the opposite.
Yeah, yeah. And I think that you're right with that. I think animals really tap into a man's gentleness. And, it really taps into the positive masculine traits of a man, which
Hmm.
is, taking care of, being strong, but being able to take care of something, kind of helpless and weak, and being able to, go through the steps of, putting care into it, being disciplined
Hmm.
care, making a schedule for it, putting someone's, we live in such a harsh world, but, being able to bring gentleness and kindness to another animal really puts you back in touch with what's important for being, a man. Um,
Hmm.
and with that, I have another question. Um,
Okay.
yeah, what do you think the main challenges are that men face, and what are some or what is toxic about modern masculinity, and what do you think are positive masculine traits? So it's kind of like a three-part question.
Yeah, that's a lot. That's a big, deep question.
If you can't get them all, yeah.
Okay, so the first one is just what are some of the toxic masculinity traits?
What are challenges that men face?
Challenges. Oh,
In
yes.
society. Yeah, I wouldn't say what are toxic masculine traits, but what are challenges that men face that maybe they didn't face back in the generation of our parents, or before that.
Yeah, I think I think one thing that can be kind of tough is just that gender roles are always evolving. And kind of as they should be, as humans grow, they should change and adjust. But I think that maybe, there's not enough kind of, it's not embedded enough yet where it's like you've learned these things from your parents, or you've been able to mimic or mirror good relationships in your life. So I think having good role models and good relationship role models can be tough. I think kind of, our generation, and grew up more so with like those. We didn't grow up in that nuclear family where the man went to work and the woman stood home and nurtured kids. Like, things were evolving and shifting, and everyone's figuring it out, which is great, and like happy that that has changed. But I think sometimes there's not enough positive role models out there, and not enough emotionally positive role models for men to really see that, okay, like, yes, I have emotions, but how do you talk about those emotions? How do you process your own emotions? And then how do you process the emotions of those around you that you care about or that you love? There's kind of this element missing. And I think working with kids over the past few years, like, I've seen how much more emotional intelligence is being put into just everyday curriculum and everyday programs in terms of acting with kids, whereas I don't think we had that in school. So there's a higher pressure for having this emotional awareness and being emotionally literate in a lot of ways, but we didn't necessarily get that in school. I could be wrong. Some people may have gotten it more so than I did, but I know, Jack, you and I have talked about that too. Growing up, it was still more of the, no, you're being too emotional, bury it, don't say this, don't do that, don't go to, therapy wasn't a big thing yet.
I've had such a strong stigma, it's like when I was a kid or whatever growing up about therapy, that I haven't really approached it with an open mind until my 40s. So it took a lot of like unlearning for me to say, what, I do need therapy. I do need to go ahead and address these inner problems, and it's not a weakness. It's actually a strength and a sign of, like you said, emotional intelligence and strength.
Yeah,
Um,
and I will say, to add to that, part of the I think part of the thing is too, at the same time, we're also being bombarded by social media, media in general, all of these images and ideas of what we should be or how we should be or what's the ideal to be. That is constantly a moving target. It is never like one thing or the other. You know what I mean? It's like, oh, be big and strong. Oh, but no, don't do that. You need to, you actually have to be more like this. Oh, no, be like the, and women get it a lot, but I know men are also getting it in terms of their physical appearance, how they should act. Oh, no, you have to be big and macho. Oh, no, you should be more sensitive and romantic. And it's kind of like there's no reconciling all of these things. And there's not a lot of space for men to safely figure it out. There's not a lot of space for them to try things out, make mistakes, to really talk it through in depth. And I think that's also kind of a problem with the loneliness, is that you're not having those connections where you can just talk to a friend and say like, okay, like I've been really feeling this, or I've been feeling insecure about this, or I've been feeling pressure to be this, or like I want to be like this, but I don't know how to get there. It's like I'm not sure where men are able to have these conversations. And other men I talk to, even when they have good friends, they don't necessarily talk about that kind of stuff.
They don't.
And women, we talk about it a lot. And there are there are even just groups online where it's easy that women feel like are safe spaces to discuss that. But I haven't heard of or seen anything where men have that ability as much. And I can imagine that can be really tough and isolating.
Yeah, I agree. And for a lot of men, it is. For a lot of men, it is. And, that's why they don't have, a lot of men don't have the emotional regulation that a lot of women do. Is because they don't have, examples to work off of. You look at, I'm not going to get political here or anything like that, but you look at the leadership in the world today, and it's a lot of men who don't display emotional regulation, that don't display that kind of emotional maturity. And these are the examples that a lot of men have, whether it's in politics, whether it's in social media, whether it's in sports. Like the domestic violence thing is a reoccurring theme across the board with men. And I find that stems from a lack of emotional regulation.
Yeah. And I will say too, there has always been this, long running line that like women are so emotional and reactive, and it's just men are as well. It's kind of this farce almost that, I think people are finally waking up to. And it's like, men, you're allowed to be emotionally reactive, but, don't be emotionally reactive to the point where you're hurting people, which happens often. But it's like there's this denial that they're not acting emotionally with some of the things that are said or done. And, it's really tough.
Yeah, I think it comes to it's not the emotions, right? It's being not able to process those emotions. And men aren't taught to do that. Men are taught to stay away from emotions and compartmentalize. I was taught to compartmentalize, all my emotions and traumas or whatever. And, 40 years later, they came back to like bite me in the ass. And now, I'm cleaning my room, cleaning that inside room inside of me, and going to therapy and like facing those things that I didn't face 40 years ago, that I should have been facing from the beginning. But, in society, we're told not to face them. We're told to run away from emotions as men. And I think that is part of the stigma. I'm going to transition now because we're. So you are, you wanted to talk about this, so I'm not like just bringing out your tea. She's bisexual. You're bisexual. And one interesting thing that you said, because I've known you for over 10 years and I've seen you date both men and women, is one interesting thing that kind of blew my mind that you said the other day is that men can't be bisexual. Um,
Yeah.
Explain that. Yeah, I'm gonna
Um,
hear for that. I think you're right. I mean, in a lot of ways. But yeah, I would like your explanation of that statement.
yeah, so there's so yeah, so I'm bi and like you said, I've dated both men and women and just kind of had a lot of different conversations and experiences. One of my really good friends, she found an organization, Rewrite the Byline, which has amazing information, stats. She does panels just about what it is to be bisexual because it's the largest group of the LGBTQ are bi people, and they are the most unrepresented. So, in terms of funding and research and information, so she's compiled a lot of information along with someone else she works with who he's a bisexual man. And so, and he's also in entertainment. So they have very interesting perspectives on this. And just also from collectively talking with these people, volunteering in the community a lot, things like that. And then also people that I've dated and had conversations with, it's, and what's shown in media is that if a man is with another man, he's just gay.
Forever.
It just kind of defaults to that. They're bisexual. And
Mhm.
then, if a man is bisexual and maybe, they come off as a little effeminate, whatever that means. Like, I'll just throw that out there, just whatever
Uh-huh.
that means.
I think the term,
To whoever is judging that.
so yes.
Yeah. Then of course they're gay. They're not bi. They wouldn't want to be with women. And there's really no space for men to explore that. There's a lot of women I've seen and, just talking to different groups and forums and different conversations too, with like, oh, no, a man's not bi. He's just gay. Like I wouldn't date him. He's going to be cheating on me all the time. And that's a massive trope within the bi community. Like, just because we're bi doesn't mean we're cheaters. So let's put that out there. Because that's another thing too. And that's another thing that's also assumed is that, oh, well, if he's with a woman, he's just going to be going off having these, risky relationships with men. And it's just really tough where men don't have that space to explore their sexuality, talk about what they're into, what they like. Even men kind of being more sexually open with trying different things that might not be standard sexual acts. A lot of times people just assume then that, they're bi. There was just kind of a group forum conversation that I saw where it's like, oh, if a man, and I've seen this multiple times, if a man has a vibrator, then, oh, they're definitely cheating on you or they're gay. And it's kind of like, um, these very thin lines of correlations, but there's no conversations happening. In none of these instances is there curiosity about like, oh, is that for you? Do you like to use that on your partner? There's no, oh, is there something else that you like or, what turns you on sexually? Or, oh, have you ever had an experience with people being open and not judgmental and talking about it? And I think it's really, really sad. There's very few men I've met who can talk about their bisexual experiences. And, I've had one person who he talked to me about how he didn't think he was, but he kind of was opened up to it. And, in a safe way, talked to people and then kind of explored that area and found out like, oh, you know what? I think I am now. I think I will identify this. And it took me so many years because I never had a safe space to do this or explore. And to me, that is extremely commendable and
Yeah.
takes a lot of courage. And someone who would come off as a very traditional epitome of a classic manly
Great.
man
Yeah.
saying this.
Yeah.
And, and same thing, I think he was in his 40s, that it took him that long to find that. And I think that's really, really sad that men are just stuck in this little box and they can't really go outside of that or explore. Whereas if women do that, it's almost cheered on like, oh, yay. The amount of inappropriate comments I've had when people heard I'm bi.
The opposite problem too, though, with women, it's kind of fetishized and it's not taken seriously. You know
It
what I'm
isn't.
saying? It was
Yep.
like, oh, that's hot. You know what I'm saying? Instead of
Yep.
like, oh, I have, a deep emotional connection, a deep emotional attraction to both men and women. and making those differentiations. And like you said, I feel like with the male community, like if you even admit that you have any like attraction to a male, it's like a knock on you being a man, immediately, and
Mhm.
it's like, well, you're gay, you know and then it leaves you kind of as an outsider, because like, do you go then to the gay community for support, or if you feel straight, like, are you do you have that straight community to go to? And a lot
Yeah.
of people that are straight won't accept you, as being a straight person if you've had gay experiences. I know a lot of people who've said that. It's like, once you do one thing, you're gay for life, and
Yeah.
there's no nuance to it, right? So yeah.
Yeah. And that term is bi erasure, where you're just trying to eliminate the word and the whole, feeling of being bi. You're just saying that doesn't exist. And it's a really difficult thing to go through.
It is, and it's constricting. It's a constricting.
Um, I have one
But we're
stat though
almost up.
that I do want to read this one stat though, because this comes from
Yeah.
Rewrite the
Yeah.
Byline, and I think this really kind of sums up part of the problem. So,
Yeah.
nearly half of bi men will experience sexual violence in their lifetime. So, almost 50%, compared to 40% of gay men will experience
Uh-huh.
sexual violence, and 20% of straight men will experience sexual violence. So, those are
Mm.
the kind of stats and numbers we're looking at with how kind of bad it is with men who
Wonder
are bi.
up about it, because it opens them up to violence.
It
Wow.
does, yeah. Hmm.
Thank you for sharing that. Thank you for sharing that. But yeah, we're getting down to time. So one thing I do with all my guests before we, sign off with them, is I tell them what I appreciate about them. And of course, me and you have been best friends for over 10 years. There's so much appreciation that I have for you. As an outsider, one thing that I appreciate about you is all you do for animals. I know whenever I have a situation with any kind of animal, whether it's my animals or friends' animals, you're the first person I call, because I just trust you, and your commitment to animals is amazing. But personally, the thing that I appreciate about you has been your loyalty, and just the fact that I've always been able to, any emergency I've ever had, I've called you. You've been there for me. You've loaned my car before. You've done all these things for me, um, and that's why you're my best friend. And it's like, it feels so great, because I don't have much family. Most of them have died. But it's so great to have someone that's like family, like you. So I appreciate you and love you for that. Um, and yeah, thank you for being on the podcast. Do you have any final things that you would like to say before we sign off?
Yes, you totally are family, Jack. And I have to say, I appreciate about you just always being so kind of open and willing to talk about things and saying, it's like nice that every time we see each other, it's always like, bye, I love you, and I think that's so important. And just always being honest and talking about what you're feeling. I think friendships are hard, can be at times, especially over all this time. And I think that's one thing that really shows that I love about your masculine side of you always wanting to help and fix things as well, and always being there for me, but just your quiet strength and openness with it.
I appreciate that. I really do. You make me a better man, through our talks and stuff like that. So it's always good. That's why I always encourage men. I'm like, have a really good platonic female friendship.
Yes.
Helps so
Yes.
in so many ways, that that other men can't relate to. So it's great. So thank you so much. We'll wrap it up with that for today. And I will go to my closing. That's it for today's episode of The Other Side of Tough. I'm Jack Starr, reminding you that real strength is found on the outside. Catch you next time. Thank you so much, Saralyn. It's been great
Thank
having you.
you.
Appreciate all your insight.
Yes, thanks for doing this, Jack, and having me.
All right. Have a good one.
Bye.